we have a bunch of different kinds of examples here. Sarah, do you want to pick out some that you were drawn to or interested in? Just you can see some of the different kinds of construction more.
Sure. Well, so we were going to talk about how some are super simple, kind of just folded and stapled paper, and then some are more obviously individually handmade. I'm always more drawn physically to the individual and handmade. But
these, they're not all from the same place, but there are several of these that are called free poetry, and they are put out by Boise State University, and they are free, chapbook length, and they are, lots of really cool poets who, I would say, have several full-length books, but are featured, some of their poems here featured in chapbook length, and they're just very simple, stapled.
And this isn't from the same series, although the poet also has some geographical ties. But again, it's got a nice blue margin here that looks kind of like a binding, but all it is a color part of stapled paper. It's not complicated, but it's simple and accessible and light and lovely and easy to take with you.
Yeah. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have a publisher that we both like a lot, Little Red Leaves.
So Little Red Leaves does everything by hand, literally every single edition of every book by hand. So they
specifically their textile series, yeah.
Specifically their textile series. So they have contests, often yearly, but not always yearly, because sometimes they're back-ordered on making more of a text by hand. And for instance, this one, you can see is literally sewn. So I'm trying to show you the texture. This is cloth, and you can see where they've sewn patterns into the binding. And then they've sewn the pages in. And it's small and it's light, but it's so beautiful and it's loved in the making. And again, it has that tactile quality. I love the whole.
Yeah, I'm so silly about these. They came in these little plastic sleeves, and some of them I have kept them in them, just trying to preserve them. But yeah, there's a lot of variety of kinds of work that they feature as well. Those are some erasures, I believe, from or cut-up poems from the Los Angeles Times. There's a translation of Virgil's The Aeneid. And we have a couple of friends who have books of poetry. Yeah, that one's
I'm holding
cool.
it. It's sort of like the cover and the inside are opposite orientation. But one of the things that's amazing about this is it would be really difficult to sell a publisher on printing this kind of paper with this kind of grid and these kind of dimensions. So the idea that someone can do it by hand on a smaller edition is really great.
Just nerding out. This one's a little smaller. This is Rachel Bloody-Plessy's an excerpt of her drafts. And this is Brad Vogler, who's a poet friend of ours, graduated from CSU.
And if you look at how different the dimensions are to some of these, this is something you couldn't get a major publisher to do either.
I mean, they're beautiful objects to own. We both like to support all of our friends who have publications, whether they're full-length books or not. And so we've got Caroline, Knapp, Knapp, and Brad Vogler.
He lives down the street from me.
Yeah. So it's not based in Colorado, but they just happen to be a couple of poets that went to CSU who have work published with them. So that is definitely a favorite of ours.
And then we're a little bit biased in this one, but both Cassie and I, here, you take mine, I'll take yours. Both Cassie and I, the same year or the year after each other, were finalists for a press called Gazing Grain Press. We both submitted chapbooks, and both of our chapbooks were finalists. So we didn't get our whole manuscripts, our whole chapbook manuscripts published, but they took a poem from each of ours, and from all of the finalists, And they published each of them in this
Oh, this one is
crazy...
yours. I see.
Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha,
In
gotcha.
this crazy, like, origami paper
Yeah.
of one broadside. So this is Cassie's. Hold on, I'll try and unfold it so that you can see her poem. So this is her poem. And then they put all the miniatures of all the finalists of one year into, like, an envelope. Yeah.
Yeah, Sarah's has a cool cover that's colored.
I forgot.
And then when you unfold it, yours are printed on this transparent sort of like vellum.
Yeah, I remember.
So yeah, I mean, and inside of the envelopes are the little tiny miniature chapbooks of like, or I guess they're not chapbooks, but they're like, again, they're objects. They're poetry, art objects of several other writers. So they're also a really cool press, Gazing Grain press, and yeah. Couple of other cool examples. This is Sasha Stevenson's chapbook, and I'm trying to remember what is the chapbook called? History of the Human Family, and it ended up becoming a larger book called House of Deer. And this is another letterpress book, which Sasha and her husband, the poet Gordon Hadfield, also had a letterpress, and this was a poet whose work they published. So just regularly printed on the inside, but only the cover is letterpress. It's Martin Corliss Smith's.
These are two chapbooks by Dan Beachy Quick, one of the faculty at CSU, whose some of his work you've read. This is by a press called Poor Claudia. This is by Spork Press. This is a press I like a lot. They do all of their covers with this like cardboard.
Yeah, it's like compressed
Compressed cardboard. And it's funny because inside, they used to work out of this garage, and they say, bound with High Life, Black Butte, Porter, early 90s goth electro, and hands, because they just do everything in their garage. But they do these really beautiful professional quality work. So this is one of Dan's books called Overtakelessness. It's really beautiful.
One of the other things that I was talking about, chapbooks, was the communities that form around them, or the communities that come together to make them. And a really great example of that is a group of poets in Nebraska, Amanda Huckins, Paul Hansen Clark, Rachel Wolfe are three off the top of my head, but a part of this poetry collective there in Lincoln, Nebraska. It used to be called Space, SP, and then there was a gap, CE, because they just rented this tiny, tiny space in this building for these free community poetry workshops, and then they also made chapbooks. And so you'll be reading one of Amanda's chapbooks, but there are a couple others. You can see the little symbol for space on the back. And again, these are pretty simple. This one is stitched, and this is a really cool one that they published of Rachel Wolfe with this great. The chapbook is called Sauce. Well, it's poems by Rachel Wolfe, and sauces. And they also publish these love books around Valentine's Day, and they get all of these poets from all over to submit poems, and I think there are like 4 of them, like 4 different compilations. So then anyone who submitted gets all of the books with all of the love poems in them. I've got these great epigraphs on the front of them. Like any good American, I want to kill myself, but you make it okay to take my time. So, not what you might typically think of for Valentine's poems, but a really cool project bringing in poets from all over.
And we haven't really said so, but one of the great things about it is that any system inherently has kind of like power and rules, right? And so if there's a limited number of presses that print full-length poetry texts, then there's a limited amount of voices.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a limited amount of things that are said or expected from those presses. Whereas chapbooks, like zines, anything self-made, is very extremely democratic.
Yeah, yeah.
You can print, like any good American, I want to kill myself, but you make me want to take my time.
Yeah.
Which is something you might not just find on any given press.
Yeah, and I think, I think with Space and with Amanda Huckins as well, like, they're friends publishing each other, but they also they're self-publishing, right? Like, they're publishing their own work, which some people, like, look down upon that sort of self-publishing, but...
Right. The truly democratic process is also the truly not filtered process, which means, quite frankly, some of the poets getting chapbooks put out are not as talented or not as good or not as polished as some. But I can also tell you there's a lot of chapbooks that are better than a lot of, it's a mixed bag, just like musicians putting out their own music.
Yeah, definitely. Or like, on the other end of that, like, we would love to have a Little Red Leaves chapbook. But so far that hasn't happened.
Neither of us has had that pleasure. They've denied me a few times.
Same. But yeah, Amanda, she also makes these cool little notebooks for people. Just like they're blank notebooks for them to write in, and she makes collages and binds them by hand, and so very invested in the made object. She was a part of this place called, and this is a publication from them, the IPRC, which was the Independent Publishing Resource Center in Portland, and that is my partner, the poet Drew Webster, and she met there. And it is what it says. It's like teaching you how to create these objects, how to bind them, how to use a letterpress. And there's also a workshop involved as well. So you're workshopping each other and you're making these objects. So you'll be reading some of Amanda, and we're going to hear from Amanda as well, talking about community and poetry. Yeah, those are some examples of chapbooks.